Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm going to be talking about the new album from Opus 84, Future in the Stars. Opus 84 is an American producer/composer who I've made friends with over the internet, and who you more likely than not have never heard of. Earlier this year, I heard his debut album Road to Lucid City, which featured a wide variety of influences and styles. I decided against reviewing it though, as he sounded like a 15-year-old getting the hang of Ableton in some certain parts. Which he kinda was, but I totally had enough material for a review of Road to Lucid City in retrospect. Sure, there were moments like Rave Doctor, a dubstep track in which the synths didn't sync up well with the beat, a Cosmic Dance Party, a loop-based track which accidentally shared a loop in common with a track I made with my brother back in 2009, and California Lights, which in retrospect sounded way too similar to I Remember by Deadmau5 and Cascade with a disappointingly weak beat. But for what it's worth, there was definitely much more good material than bad material. Fun foot-tapping techno like This Is My Chance and It's Just an Idea, IDM like Math and Verona, the far better produced dubstep track Hex, the Blackmill-esque Syntasia and the Madianish Clubhouse Quarry, and of course the repetitive but infectious Surround, the melody of which has been popping into my head on and off for several months now. But I don't feel so bad about putting all this out now, not only since the album has grown on me quite a bit since my first listen, but because as unprofessional as Opus 84 came off on that album, on this follow-up, Future in the Stars, that unprofessionalism has more or less entirely disappeared, sounding much cleaner and more sophisticated. In addition, while Road to Lucid City was mainly inspired by more contemporary electronic artists, this album feels inspired by older styles and artists, most notably Aphex Twin on Selected Ambient Works 8592. The vast majority of these tracks are heavily inspired by that album, but do show a tiny hint of that old Deadmau5 influence coming through in the melodies. But yeah, mainly Aphex Twin. But hey, definitely not a bad influence to have, right? While it's obviously not as good as RDJ himself, the melodies here are very much on point. I don't know if these are going to stick around in my head in the same way Surround did, but I can definitely see myself coming back to a lot of these. The album is fairly cohesive, tied together by that same isolated atmosphere that made the 8592 hold up for such a long time. The early moments of this album do kinda look back on the good moments of Road to Lucid City, starting with the relaxed drum and bass-ish Soliloquy, which has a chord progression I swear I've heard somewhere before. I initially thought it was Aphex Twin, for obvious reasons, but I don't actually think that was it. It might be from Norken or Nachtplank, maybe 01. I can't put my finger on it, and I assume it's a coincidence regardless. The second the drums start up on this song, though, the deja vu just goes away. Then we get some simpler tracks with nice melodies, like the title track and So Many Bright Gleams. The former has a nice, chilled out atmosphere, but I actually prefer the latter. It's much more intense and confident. Most of the album, though, is more chill-out material, like the abstract and atmospheric Trances for Goats, which is admittedly kind of forgettable. There were a couple of other tracks similar to this one that I think I'd be fine with out of context, but as is, like in the context of the album, don't do much for me, feel rather thin, like Arkaryob and Birthday, the latter of which I don't think lives up to its title, but never mind. I should probably mention that I also happened to hear a, demo version of this album that had, a couple of tracks missing, and also one unreleased track that didn't make the final cut of the album called Retimate Hillside. Quite frankly, I kind of wish that song had made the original cut of the album. Maybe he could release it as a bonus track or something. Because I really did like that track, and I think it could have probably been better for the album than other tracks like maybe Birthday that just don't really do much for me.
But it's just my opinion, I don't know.
There is a good stretch of more interesting tracks in the middle, though, like the lo-fi and off-kilter Faquadina, the long ambient piece, positive Sihlou, which at first reminded me of Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, but now sounds more like Brian Eno on his Apollo Atmospheres and Soundtracks album, and the prepared piano interlude fittingly titled Preparations, and totally isn't inspired by the prepared piano pieces on Aphex Twin's Drugs. Come on, what are you talking about? By the way, the various other ambient interludes placed at various parts of the album are a nice touch, like the intro, the ending track, there's like one more in the middle too. But anyway, after that Preparations interlude, we then get Don't Stray, another more conventional techno-influenced track like So Many Bright Gleams. Also pretty consistently my favorite track on the album. Like So Many Bright Gleams, I like Don't Stray's confident tone, but it feels more ethereal and distant. Still, excellent track, has a great melody. It's followed up by Fiogue. On the outset, this was one of the less memorable tracks like Trances for Goats, but has been growing on me a lot, with its unpredictable structure, catchy melodies, and varied but satisfying textures, with a nice choir-ish pad in the middle section that I like quite a bit. Then there's L Meets the J, which is probably the closest we came to one of those more, kinda slightly a little bit cringeworthy moments on Road to Lucid City. Like, this track has these crowd sound effects that kind of catch me off guard. At first it's just like, oh, okay, this is a live version or something. But then there's this one clip where the crowd starts clapping to a beat that very obviously is not the beat of the song. It's very badly inserted, much like the out of nowhere Etta James sample from Rave Doctor on the previous album. That being said, I still give this track, L Meets the J, a pass, as the synth melodies here are actually among my favorites on the album. They're very deep and soothing, and had it not been for that offbeat clapping, this would have been another easy favorite from the album. Next is the chilled out Symbiosis and the meandering Spectrum Dynamasis, which have an electric piano setting that reminds me of Sounds from the Ground. Never a bad name to invoke during a chill out album, and with the cool melodies to boot. After the already mentioned non-standout Birthday, we finally get a more fast-paced track in the spacey Tommy Cymbals, which might be this album's surround, but I'm not sure yet. But I like this song a lot too, and not just because my name actually happens to be Tommy. In case you didn't already know that. I don't think that many people know about that. Then we get into the ending. May plus 5416 Padmix is an impressive super speed drum and bass track with percussion along the lines of Vordhusband or Zygomatic 17 from Aphex Twin's Drugs, albeit with moodier and more chilled out synths on top. And finally, Fast Weeks, Slow Days, a more house-ish track like Eric Prydz style. This track ends rather abruptly and doesn't feel as propulsive as some of the other tracks on here, but is nice for variety's sake. So, overall, I found a lot I liked about this album. The chilled out and spacey atmosphere works as well as you'd expect it to, especially if you've heard Selected Ambient Works, and the melodies are all on point. As for whether it tops Road to Lucid City, well, I think the variety on that album was better, but I think Future in the Stars sounds much more professional and much more polished, aside from maybe that one moment in L Meets the J. It's not nearly as indicative that the artist is only 15, and I can see myself plopping these on my iPod at some point. Nice job, would recommend. I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10. Favorite tracks: Soliloquy, So Many Bright Gleams, Positive Sihlou, Don't Stray, Fiogue, Symbiosis, Spectrum Dynamasis, Tommy Cymbals, and May plus 5416 Padmix. Least favorite track, Birthday. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.